start with LSU football today as we get to Sharif on Saints coming up here in the next segment. Blake Baker, LSU defensive coordinator, was with the guys on OTB this morning with Jake and Matt, and I thought I had some interesting things to say. One of them I found particularly interesting because we talked to Brian Kelly at SEC Media Days, and he has spoken very, very openly about LSU's focus on the season opener. And to a degree, from our perspective, on the outside, not from the inside, on the outside, that's kind of hollow talk. Like, oh, you're more focused on this game, so you weren't that focused on USC, or you weren't focused at all on Florida State, or like, what does that mean you're more focused on this one, or you're making it more of a goal? And Brian Kelly has said outwardly, he's like, I'm not going to get you too deep into the weeds, but I'm just going to let you know that, like, we've got an internal goal here. And the players talked about it, and we've certainly highlighted it as the media, and we heard from him multiple times in multiple different rooms last week in Atlanta about it. But Blake Baker cracked the door a little bit this morning on just what it means that, hey, this is a little bit different as far as season opener. This is Blake Baker this morning on OTB.
The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result, right? And I think that's the coolest thing about Coach Kelly, man. He's always learning. He's always adapting. I think he does it year to year based off the opponent. Also, who is on our current roster. And I think we have a very mature roster that can handle, us. Some when you have a young team, sometimes you can build it up too much, right? And so I think he does a fantastic job with that. But I'm excited about it. I know we're doing some things differently in fall camp, and we haven't gotten necessarily into the nuts and bolts of what those things are going to be. But, again, I think it's just created a little more sense of urgency with our guys, too.
And I'll add to that because you don't want to play a minute and a half, 2-minute soundbite here on the radio show. So that was the gist of it. But he also included in that bite a little bit later that, we had our spring practice, and then we came back and worked for a week. And in that last week of spring practice, we did Clemson install. Like, he said that on the record. And I don't know. I can't speak to the end of Brian Kelly's first few springs here. And I don't know if they talked about Florida State then or if they talked about USC then. I don't know. But it feels like that was a little bit different. Now, how much help can you do over 3 or 4 practices in April when you're talking about a game that's going to be played at the end of August, early September? I don't know that either. But that cracks the door and shows me a little bit more than just simply, yeah, we're focused. I would put 2 bites together. That one from Blake Baker and then Brian Kelly, who said at Media Days that we haven't necessarily worried about the depth chart in the spring. We've worried about that in the fall. We're going to get more closer to that in the spring so that when we get to the fall, we know who we're preparing. So to me, these are the 2 things that I would suggest are Clemson-centric for what LSU's doing that are different from what they've done the last few openers. 1, give a little bit of time to that opponent in the spring. And 2, get to your depth chart more quickly at the very beginning of camp. You don't need to have a 3-week position battle. Cut it down to 5 practices. Okay, this is the guy. Go. I don't know if it's good or bad. I don't know if it's going to work or not. But I do know that Brian Kelly has taken it upon himself since he took this job to change and adapt. It hasn't created championships, but, probably should have kept Corey Raymond around. Did it? Well, this defensive staff, not really getting it done, changed it. Well, we weren't going to buy players. It didn't work. Changed it. Now, you got to win games. You can't just change as the wind blows and say, oh, well, he's changing. That's good. You have to win games. But he's doing things differently. And I think that he should be applauded to an extent for that. Got to win games, though, as we said. Second part of this, Blake Baker talking on OTB. They got a lot of transfers coming in. They might start 6 or 7 transfers in this game against Clemson. They might. And that's a challenge for a defensive coordinator to come in and mesh all of those personalities together on a unit right out of the gate. And Blake Baker talked about the challenges that presents.
I think it's probably spread out across the board like you just talked about when You've got a really, really good, strong group of upperclassmen mixed in with some younger classmen that have played some football as well. But those guys, they spend more time in the weight room and out on the field running 110s than they do, in practice, especially this time of year. So to see those guys in that leadership, getting out there for some team runs this summer and watching them, man, it's imperative. And the unselfishness, again, we have a lot of really good players, in my opinion, but they're all bought into one common goal. So that makes it we got a chance to have a special unit based off of those things.
That all sounds very good. This is optimism season. We're still in July. That all sounds great, but it is a challenge to take that many transfers from that many different systems and get everybody on the same page. Because as we know on defense, 10 guys can do their job. If one fails, it can be a real bad situation. And you've got to get everybody on the same page. And right now, Blake Baker can't do much. He can recruit. He can run camps, but he can't be out there working with guys on the practice field. And that's what those player-led practices are for. That's what the strength and conditioning staff is for. And that's the part of the program that has to shine in June and July. And we talked to 3 players last week, and by all accounts, it is. So you take their word for it, and you hope that you see that at the end of August. Last one here, and this is a great question by Jake and Flynn. Like, what position group do you want to watch? Because Blake Baker's obviously coaching the linebackers, but he's got to have an eye on the entire defense as the coordinator, clearly. And so when I heard the question asked of Blake Baker, like, what position group are you going to be watching? I was like, well, he's going to watch the linebackers. Like, he's the linebackers coach. He's got position coaches that are doing the rest of that, and that's what I'm thinking as someone listening to the interview. But that's not where Blake Baker went, and he immediately went to one specific position group, and that's at safety.
Probably twofold. I think the safeties, especially with A.J. Halsey coming in, most of the guys we had through spring practice, so you have somewhat of an expectation of those guys going into the fall camp. And the defensive tackle position, same thing. We got some new guys that weren't here in the spring. When you look at Bernard and the 2 freshmen, Buddy Mathis and Brandon Brown. And really the young guys at linebacker. I'm really intrigued to see, what those 3 incoming freshmen do. Again, we had Charles Ross here. But overall, I'd say the safety position is probably what I'll be and most interested in. And seeing how those guys gel. I think you have to have such chemistry back there together. And we've been mixing and matching them this summer, and I think it'll be an intriguing position battle.
As do I. And I don't have a great feel for it right now. But I think to the point that I made at the beginning where we're talking about trying to get to the depth chart as quickly as possible when you get into fall camp, I think that when you look at safety, like, you've got a lot of options. Jordan Gilbert is back, now healthy. Played with one shoulder last year. He's healthy. Okay? Well, you got Deshaun Spears and Joel Rogers and Javian Toviano back. So that's 3 guys who were on the team last year that didn't have a big impact, whatever reason. Rogers and Spears are freshmen. Toviano still changing positions. Is he a corner? Is he a nickel? Is he a safety? They were moving around. None of those guys played a big role. Do they play a big role moving forward? Depends. And then you bring in 2 guys, and I'm not going to count Mansour Delane in this because I think he's a corner right now. I will mention him here and then kind of push it off to the side because I don't think that's where he's going to play. I think he could. But you've got Tamarcus Cooley that you bring in and A.J. Halsey that you bring in who profile safeties. And to me, like, if I had to handicap it right now, I'm going to go with Jordan Gilbert and A.J. Halsey. Like, that's if I had to handicap it. But I realize, like, I'm leaving Deshaun Spears on the sideline in that scenario. And if I kind of had it, if I could wish it into existence, and the best 2 men won at that position, but the best 2 men were A.J. Halsey and Deshaun Spears, that's probably preferable to me. But you got a lot of guys. That's like 6 that you can choose from for 2 spots. You can kick somebody down a nickel or dime and, maybe get 3 of those guys on the field. Just depends on what your corners do and how Corey Raymond wants to handle that. But it is a very, very interesting spot. And when the head coach comes to the podium multiple times over the course of a season and says, we have to play better at safety, like, you get the picture. That's a very kind way to say it in front of a microphone in a composed manner, maybe wearing a sport coat. Probably not as kind in the film room and on the practice field when you're letting Nicholls State and South Carolina and Ole Miss rip off 60-yard touchdown runs. Not great. So they got to play better. And it was interesting to me that, yes, Blake Baker did tap dance around the whole defense, which is his role, but he started at safety and he finished at safety and called safeties by name with A.J. Halsey coming in, who, by the way, wasn't at spring ball. So it's a unit that's got to play better. Brian Kelly said in Atlanta, like, we have to play better defense to win a national championship. That can't be any clearer. It is what it is. They've got to be better on that group, and Blake Baker has a lot of confidence in that building. And I think there's a good amount of confidence in the LSU fan base that Blake Baker's team in that unit's going to take one more step forward this year. Hopefully it's a big one for the Tigers as they start with Clemson coming up in, I think, six weeks from right now. So, hey, thanks for watching Hunt on LSU. Before you get out of here, do us a couple of favors. Hit that like button, leave your comments below, and subscribe to the channel for all your Fighting Tiger football talk. See you next time.